Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It is 10 o'clock, so we're going to get going. Just go through some intros, and just as I see other people jumping onto the webinar. So we have myself, Chris Haigh. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Mercury IT, and we have Martin. Good morning.
Morning. Welcome, everyone.
You want to just introduce yourself, Martin, as well?
So I'm the General Manager and Head of Cybersecurity at Mercury, and like Chris, we sort of focus quite heavily on the cybersecurity space within not only our company, but also across all of our clients. So that provides us with a lot of insight into some of the ways that people get into systems and the sort of countermeasures that we need to put in place. So hence why we're talking about that today.
Absolutely. I think we were busy doing a presentation for a client around some of the security and how we would protect their business or potential clients going forward. And I actually said to Martin, you know what, this would actually make for a really good just general presentation, because I think there's a lot of reports and news articles, etc., and they do like to sensationalize a lot of the stuff as well. But I also think the businesses themselves have got to be quite careful in what they say on how the cyber criminals got in. So you'll often see words like sophisticated attack, etc. And if you've been in the industry for a while around cybersecurity and seen how they actually get in and what actually happens, you'll know that it's almost never sophisticated. It's generally pretty simple, and I am talking about the majority of the time. Don't get me wrong, there are some very sophisticated attacks out there, and with any luck, your business won't ever be caught up in something like that. But I did want to cover off probably the 99%, the majority of the types of attacks that do take place, and how do we actually protect ourselves from that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, as you say, Chris, most of them, the attacks aren't sophisticated, but you're right, certainly those ones where you see attacks on government agencies, they're generally a little bit more sophisticated because they're a state-based actor rather than criminal actors.
Absolutely agreed. And just to get that into perspective, so you're talking about government-based or state-based attacks, and they're using the types of attacks that would technically could cost up to $1 million in expertise to actually break in. So it's got to be valuable enough for them to break in. So we're talking about things like, the People's Liberation Army or a branch thereof breaking into Google back in 2009. That was obviously highly sophisticated, and they were going after Google source code. So it's very, very specific in what they were doing. And if you recall at the time, and around that time, Google was trying to break into the Chinese market, obviously with lots of caveats in place. But I think China did not want them there. So there you go. So what we're talking about is a little bit more run-of-the-mill. It's the stuff we see, thankfully not on a daily basis, but it's certainly happening on a daily basis out there. So I wanted to kind of cover off the common kind of entry points and how businesses actually get hacked and what the actual methods there are. So we get a basic understanding of how that's happening, and then we can look at what some of the mitigation things are. So how do we protect ourselves? So I've put this straight out there. I'm not holding it for the end or anything. The three most common ways into a business are quite simply some sort of external vulnerability. So you have a web server, an email server, sometimes a remote access server, VPN server, etc. Something facing the public. So it's something that can be hit from anywhere in the world, essentially. And if that particular piece of software is vulnerable, that could be a problem. So we'll get on to a little bit more about that in a second. The next one is remote access. And I think, Martin, you'd agree, this is the one that's probably caused us the most headaches.
It certainly has, because most businesses rely on having some kind of remote access into their environment, especially if they have a server-based environment. And that facilitates, their normal business as usual activities, their operational activities, but it does promote a large degree of external access. And we've seen certainly the mitigation strategies around how we deal with that aren't always the most well taken up by businesses, because it creates additional steps for people. So we certainly, one of the battles we always have is not only putting the technological controls in, is getting past the hearts and minds of the clients to get them to change the way that they've done things for many, many years.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about that as we come up to that as well. And then the last one we want to talk about and get into a little bit of some details, successful phishing attacks. And by far, this is still the biggest and easiest way that businesses get breached. When you see the ones in the news where they talk about sophisticated attacks, etc., it's almost always a successful phishing attempt.
Even that really well-known breach at the Australian National University was successful phishing attack.
It was successful phishing, and that we were told how awfully complex.
Yes, how awfully complex.
Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. There could have been a lot of complexity on the back end of that, and that might have been a lot of complexity in escalation of privileges and lateral movements and things like that. But the point is the way they got in is the part that we can do a lot to try and mitigate. Now, what I wanted to do is actually go through how a criminal, or if you see in the newspaper, they'll refer to a hacker, but essentially a cyber criminal that wants to get in and extract some sort of value from this business, and how they would do it. Now, when you're looking from an infosec side of things, so information security side of things, we often look at this model here, which is the cyber kill chain. So Lockheed Martin put this together a long while ago to explain how attackers would actually think about getting into the environment. And then this allows us on the defensive side to look at, well, what do we need to put in place to help mitigate this? So basically, this starts off from the left-hand side there, from the recon side, and then moves through that kill chain to get what they're after. So just starting on the recon side, so they're talking about reconnaissance, and the only thing we can really say about the reconnaissance is around staff education. Like it says there, there's not much you can do there, but we're talking about things like, a public-facing web server, domain name system, so DNS. You have to publish like that web server onto the web. Your staff will be on LinkedIn, and they will be linked to your company most of the time.
And it is about that education around not putting too much information on public profiles like social media profiles, Facebook's, LinkedIn. Keep some of your cards closer to your chest. That's kind of one of the mitigations for some of that recon.
Yeah, agreed. And if we have a look at this, it's also things like a common one I see, for instance, is someone starting at a new business, and it's like, oh, first day pictures, and they've got their ID badge on them, things like that. And it seems generally not really a problem. But a hacker or a criminal will look at that, can zoom in on that photo, maybe grab a staff ID or something like that. And where they use that is in the confidence piece. They call it a con artist for a reason. So when they do a phishing attack, maybe into the IT of that business, so they can actually use that staff number and go, hey, I'm new, I'm looking for this or that, and could glean that information a lot quicker. So that's the part we really have to worry about. Moving on from that, we get to the initial attack. Now, that initial attack could be that phishing attack, as an example. And once they get access, so someone gives them the credentials, they've essentially established a beachhead. They're in the environment. So they might be just sitting in somebody's email at that point. And quite often you don't know. So they've logged in, they're in that email, and they're looking at the emails going backwards and forwards, getting an understanding of your business. So how does your business run? Like, who does this person normally talk to? Who do they report to? If they're lucky, that person is sitting in the accounts department or something like that. So they're starting to see invoices or etc. And they can really use that. Now, the next thing they will move to is they'll possibly escalate privileges. They'll look to do that because what they've got is a normal user account. So what they're trying to do is get to a higher privileged account. So to get to an admin account, so they've got more access in the environment. The internal recon I've kind of already spoken about, looking at that flow of traffic backwards and forwards to actually understand what's going on. Lateral movement we've seen, and this is why I wanted to talk about this. So we've had a instance that we had to go and shut down where the initial attack actually came in through a remote access server. Once they got access to the remote access server, they were looking around at what they could get access to, and then they did a lateral movement into the payroll system. Unfortunately, the payroll system had a standard username and password on there that the company had been using for forever. So they actually got in that and managed to get money out of that particular environment. The establish a persistence piece is a little bit more technical. They could actually plant or create other accounts in that environment. So if their account is found out to be breached and locked out or changed the password, they've got other accounts that they can use to jump back in. And again, quite often without your knowledge. This is kind of, you'll see that circular pattern there because it depends on what they're doing and how often they'll need to do that. So lateral movement, escalate privilege, establish persistence, and continue. And also then finally moving out to exfiltrate. Now that could be exfiltrating your data out the system. So grabbing copies of whether that's medical records, changing bank account details, so pay goes somewhere else, or like Martin, we've seen where they've adjusted invoices or something.
Yeah, or adjusted bank accounts. So as in the payroll system, the way they got the money out was they changed the bank account details for the staff to their bank account number. So there's certainly other ways that they quite sneakily can exfiltrate money from your business as well. But yes, the invoices is a good one. Also, they then start to see how people internally start to talk to each other. So if you've got loose processes and the CEO just tells the CFO to transfer money for certain purchases at sort of random times, they get to know that without question, and they get to know that, and they can do the same thing. They can mimic that CEO's style of writing. They can mimic the kind of things that they buy, and then just ask them to transfer money. So many different ways once they're inside to see exactly how people interact.
Agreed. Now, just going back to the recon bits, I just wanted to show you how quick it is to find information. And this is what I'm finding can be a problem is businesses don't take this part seriously. In fact, a lot of what we talk about, they don't take seriously. So quite often they'll put controls in place once it's too late. So they've been breached once. That's when controls tend to go in. Now, this is a particular query I ran on a specific business, so we'll call it Company A. So essentially here, I just wanted to show how quickly I could find information. So this took me all of 3 to 5 minutes, tops. And essentially, I had obviously an email address of the company because it's who we were dealing with. So I had the companyaa.com.au, and I ran a DNS query. So what's available out on the internet for me to connect to? So just off that information, I immediately found out that they use AWS for a couple of things like website hosting. They've got remote access to their email. They use Sonic Wall firewalls, and they use Mimecast for email protection. Now, again, remember where this is important. Because I have this information, I can now use this in a phishing email as an example. And then who would I phish? Well, that's where LinkedIn comes in again. So quick query, I've got 225 staff linked, and I have job titles. So I can see in this particular case, there was a Stephen in IT. So I could craft an email to Stephen that looks like it's coming from Mimecast, as an example, and say, hey, I need you to change your password for XYZ. And I might be successful, I may not, but I've got another 224 staff members I can go after and try and get information. Once I have that information, though, is a criminal will obviously go to the dark web. So they will look at hacking forums and things like that and try and go and glean information about a business. So if I do a dark web search for compromised accounts, in this particular instance, this particular company had 149 listed accounts that had a compromise where possibly the password was listed as well for me. Now, I do want to say to everybody that's online as well, is we can run this search for you free of charge, just to see if there is anything out there. And it is quite useful, particularly around where you see you've got the dates out in October for this year. So it's relatively new. And those are the ones that you kind of want to go and get passwords changed and things like that as we move through.
It's also just a note there also around the LinkedIn search is people may not realize, even if you lock down your profile so that people can't easily navigate to it, if the criminal actually just pays the sales navigator license through LinkedIn, they get access to everything. And it gives them access to all of the back end details as well. So email addresses, phone numbers, the whole piece, because it's designed for salespeople to sort of generate leads. So it's not a hard process for them to target particular businesses because they can put in there what kind of industry they're looking for, what kind of role they're looking for, and they can navigate quite quickly to those particular LinkedIn profiles.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add to that as well. It's like I did these searches manually. So I said, it took me 4 or 5 minutes to find the information. A criminal is not going to do this manually. There's a lot of automated tools out there that can quickly do these scans, find holes, find compromised accounts, and then just come back with a list ready to go, and then load that into a different automation tool and actually automate the entire phishing process as well. So it's not a case of my company is not big enough, special enough, or whatever. Quite often you just get hit in the spray attack of what's available out there. That's quite important to note.
Absolutely.
Now, at Mercury IT, we kind of access this a little differently when we approach a business and we try and help out in what we need to do. So we've actually put together a cybersecurity roadmap in how we approach this. And I only wanted to pop this in here just to show kind of where we're talking about. So I'm not going to go through this roadmap. It's a different presentation altogether. But where we're talking about level 1, level 2, and level 3 is essentially the movement of the cybersecurity maturity that you're trying to get to. And what we're talking about here is really level 1 and level 2. It's kind of the tightening up the basics. What are the basics? Defense in depth, like your firewalls or your technical controls, etc. And as well as building awareness. And we're talking about cybersecurity training for staff. Now, from an external vulnerability, I don't want to go into this too much. There's a lot to talk about from a technical perspective on this. So I will keep this very basic. Firstly, I just want to explain what it is. So as we said in the beginning of this, we're talking about an external access. So you need to, if you're not in the IT department, you're going to need to approach your IT department and go, what is publicly available for our business? Like, what can I access from anywhere in the world, essentially? Now, you might have SaaS-based products, as well as you might have on-premises products as well. So this is where we are talking about whether it was remote access, which is kind of a separate piece, but you might have VPN access into your environment. You might have access to email on an email server sitting in your environment. It could be a web server that you're hosting. Maybe it's a portal where your customers log in and get information, things like that. And that's the type of stuff that you need to be very vigilant about. And the most important thing I would say there by far is patching. So whatever's publicly available, needs to be on a very, very strict patching regime. So as soon as Microsoft or the Linux operating system that you're running or whatever you're running, there's an update, that update needs to be applied as soon as possible. If it's a very high priority security update that's got, it's critical, you should be looking at trying to implement that within 24, 48 hours of it being released. Otherwise, you could actually get hit in one of these kind of random attacks. Right. And Martin, I think you agree, we've seen quite a bit of that as well. I think the last one was probably around the vulnerabilities around Exchange Server.
Yeah, Exchange Server and also WordPress is a big one. So a lot of businesses use WordPress as the CMS for their website. And certainly WordPress is one of those highly targeted applications across the hacker world.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, actually. It's really, really important. Because quite often the web server is forgotten about because it's often hosted not on your premises. It's not kind of part of your business. It's sitting somewhere else, like you're hosting it with GoDaddy or something else. And they can still be compromised. And, like even GoDaddy offers services to protect against that. And you should definitely look at those services. They're probably worth the money, I would say.
Absolutely, because it's one of those last minute thoughts that, oh, I forgot about the website. I haven't updated that for, I don't know, months, years.
Yeah, and that could be a huge problem. And there's a number of like scanning tools that can be used as well to check what ports are open. I mean, this is a little bit more technical, so I might be talking a bit more to the IT types that are on the call, but this is just off the Shodan monitor. So we run Shodan monitoring across all our clients to see what ports are open. In this particular case, I just showed that we've got port 25 and 83 open onto our email filter. Obviously, port 25 has to be open to accept email. Port 83 is just to go and release email in quarantine. But it's very important for us then to make sure that that filter is running the latest software at all times and it's always patched. All right? So it's not always a case of, oh, I'll just shut those ports down. You can't always do that. And don't get me wrong, there might be ports that you can shut down. I might have looked at this output and gone, why is 83 there? Yeah, and go and shut that down. Maybe it's not required. Remote access. Do you remember that time we had to kick the Nigerian hackers out?
Yeah.
I'm not even joking. It literally was a Nigerian hacker. It was insane. So he actually compromised the remote access server only to use that as a phishing platform. So it didn't hack the business itself. He just wanted access to the server. And then he was sending out phishing emails to thousands of businesses across the world from the server, which is just absolutely ridiculous. So, and this is one of those cases of where we had a lot of resistance from the business to remove or secure this remote access server. Until, of course, this happened. Then all of a sudden we were ready to secure it. So what do we need to do? The very, very first thing is do you actually need it? I mentioned earlier, a lot of businesses are moving to software as a service. So think about like Microsoft 365 and, whether it's Xero for accounting or whatever it is. So quite often remote access is not required anymore. So the first question is can you get rid of it? Is it possible?
There's a lot of legacy. There's an awful lot of legacy where we have one or two users might be using that remote access because they've got some files in a particular file server, and you need to ask the question, are you still accessing that? Oh, I haven't accessed it for about 12 months.
Yeah.
But if you ask them, do you need access, they'd say yes.
Yeah, it's really checking if it's needed, and there's often other ways of doing it. So yeah, that file might be in some sort of access server somewhere, but maybe that can be moved to SharePoint Online or OneDrive or something else. So it's really checking. Like the first thing I would say is, can you remove it? That's the very first step. If you absolutely can't remove it, then you need to look at protecting it. So the very first thing is what we've already mentioned, patching and so forth has to be done. The next thing is your multi-factor authentication. So you might see that written as 2FA or MFA. So that's obviously looking at, as you log in with your username and password, it's going to prompt either for a code that you will put in. It could send you a message on SMS as a code, or you might generate a code out of your phone, out of a authentication piece of software, or it might push the authentication to you where you've got to accept or deny the login. And I just wanted to note here, and again, the people within IT might be going, yes, MFA is not the be all and end all. And you're right, it's not a silver bullet. There isn't any silver bullet. They're not all created equal. So we've already seen any kind of MFA that pushes an SMS to a phone is far weaker. In fact, in the US, if you look at any government contract, etc., does not allow that MFA as a version of MFA that they would allow, because it can be compromised very, very easily. So you should be looking for a push type. That's what you should be asking for from your IT, and that's what they need to move to. Having said that, that is also not foolproof. So sorry about that, but it's still better than nothing and makes it a lot harder. Remember I said to you, hackers are going to do that quick scan, what's open, try and hit it really quickly. As soon as it becomes a problem, they'll move on to the next target generally. So that's what we're after. So I suppose it's the equivalent, like you were saying, Martin, it's like locking your front door and having a front fence and locking the gate. If you've got a neighbor that doesn't have any of that, it's probably them that's going to get hit. I know that sounds horrible. So your neighbor's going to get hit.
But it is. It's exactly that. Is if I've made it just a little bit harder, they're going to go for an easier target. It's the old one. I don't have to run faster than the bear. I just need to run faster than you. So it is that case of just making it a little bit harder for the hacker, and they'll move on to the next one. And we do stress quite often that if a really serious hacker wants access to a system, they can do it. There's so many different ways that they will do it, but it's about the effort and about how much effort that they put into it. So we have seen where hacker services are available on the dark web, where if company A needs information about company B, they will bid for a hacker to get in, and they will bid millions of dollars at times if the information is worth that much to them. And at that point, once you've got a serious hacker organization trying to target a business, that's awfully difficult to prevent. But for the most part, the size of businesses we're talking about, the people that are probably on this call, they're not usually in that Lockheed Martin type stealth fighter secrets that people are looking for.
Yeah, and look, for those on the call or watching this back as the video, and you're wondering, am I that type of business? It comes down to risk. So the couple of things that you would definitely ask yourself is, do you work for the Australian government or contract to it in any kind of capacity? So doing work for local council, things like that. You'd definitely be on the list. Make no bones about it. Even if you're small, so if you're just a contractor by yourself, your systems and processes are going to need to be very, very tight, and you're going to have to take this stuff very seriously. Now, Australia's government will start mandating this a lot more. It's already mandated across contractors in that, using essential aid and things like that. This will trickle down to essential services as well, and infrastructure. So if you're power, water, and then you think, well, I'm not a water company. It's like, yeah, but do you provide services to the water company? Because that will flow down to you. So do think about that. Think about the kind of chain there of access and who's providing it. And if you're within that chain, you're probably going to get caught up in that. So you will need to look at how you're protecting yourself. Education would be another one, Martin, that I've seen on that list, and it's going to get into Dragnet as well. Right, and then finally, and we are kind of running out of time, but finally we're talking about phishing, and within that, smishing and vishing. So I love these terms, but smishing, if you've not heard of it, is just those SMSs that you get trying to get your details and that, like, oh, you've got a parcel waiting, just click on this link. I'm sure you've all seen it. There's a lot of them. You just have to keep on your game, make sure that you're not clicking on those incorrect links. Vishing is the ones where you actually get the voice call itself. So quite often it's the robocall. So that automated call generally telling you that you've got a tax bill and you're going to be arrested, you know, if you don't call this number immediately, that kind of stuff. So obviously don't fall for anything like that. If you are concerned about it, obviously hang up the call and call the ATO or whoever called you back from their website. Go look up the number and call them back directly. First thing I'd mention here is around technical controls. So around phishing, a lot of that can be stopped, and I mean probably more than 90% can be stopped around email scanning, having your SPF, DMARC, DKIM, all those things in place. And I know that's very, very technical. If anybody needs to talk to us about what those things are and how do we put them in place, etc., we can definitely help you with all of that. So just reach out after this call. Or go to your IT team and speak to them and say, hey, do we have these things in place? Definitely helps having that sort of stuff in place.
And URL filter.
Yes, absolutely. And then, you know, finally, it's around user training, and that's the big one. So, you know, when your user gets these sort of things, are they clicking on the links? You know, and we could say, so, you know, so the one, is it the one on the left or the right that we think is fake? I mean, they're pretty difficult to spot, if you ask me. Pretty evil.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that we've spoken about, Chris, is that some of these large companies are not doing the public any favors because they use shortened URLs like this. It's difficult for the average user to identify what's legitimate and what's not, because the one on the left there, the Ozpost, the mypo.st is a legitimate link.
It is legitimate. That is a legitimate one. And as you may have guessed, the one on the right is not. So, but it's very difficult to tell. And I'd say again, for people is to be suspicious. Have you actually ordered anything? And yes, I understand that gets very difficult around this time of year as well, because you are probably ordering a lot more than you would normally order. Moving on from that though, and taking it away from kind of, this is a more personal on your phone type scenario, but can affect businesses as well. Looking at educating your staff is probably one of the biggest takeaways from today as well, because phishing is still the #1 way into the business and gives the that criminal direct access. So we work with KnowBe4 as a training company. There are quite a few of them out there, and we have worked with quite a few. We've worked with KnowBe4 for what, about 2 years now? Just over 2 years?
2.5.
Yeah, and very, very good. Good set of processes, good set of training. We're talking thousands of videos on there, great reports, so you can actually see the results. You know, they release results like this. Just talking about phish prone percentage and what that means. We're talking about, if I sent a simulation of a phishing email across your entire business, how many users do you think would actually click on the link? You know, if it was crafted really, really carefully, how many do you think would fall for it? That's your phish prone percentage. So what they're showing here is the baseline. So as we come into a business and we actually push this out, how many users would normally click on this? And on average, and we're talking out of like 6.6 million users across the world, 31% is about the average. And that holds up from what we've seen in businesses. We have had businesses all the way down at 0%, which is insane. I was quite shocked. I was like, well, good on you guys, awesome. And we've had others that are way over 60%. So a lot of training needs to take place. But you can see there over the 3 months and then over the year, we just get better as staff, as people, being educated about what is nasty out there and what isn't. So definitely works. Again, if you want to talk to us about this, more than happy. We've got a lot of experience on it. I would point out, Martin, and I'm sure you'll agree, is this is not a throw money at it to fix it. It doesn't work like that. I've seen a lot of businesses even using KnowBe4, which is amazing as a product, and it fall flat on its face. And the reason for that is just not following a decent process to make sure it gets rolled out correctly. You know, it's important that we engage with the users correctly. We engage with the stakeholders and the board of the business, engaging with HR, talking to them about the culture of the business, what training will and won't work. You know, how people respond to stuff is very, very important. So it's got to be carefully planned and rolled out to have the benefits that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely, and we've seen that so many times. It isn't about spending millions of dollars to fix the problem, but it is about doing it right, doing it right the first time, and spending a reasonable amount of money to improve your security exponentially.
Absolutely, and it does come down to risk again. So it's doing that risk analysis. I mean, quite often you can do, depending on the size of the organization, you can do a quick and dirty risk analysis to get an idea of the money spent versus how we're going to mitigate. Obviously, a larger business, you might actually have a risk department, and you know, cybersecurity absolutely sits there, and it is a risk conversation. Alrighty, I think we're pretty much at the Q&A, some questions and some answers, hopefully, coming out of there as well. I might leave the answers for you, Martin. Right, so if anybody does have any questions, by all means, you can just type them in the box there. You don't have to. You will have access to our details. By all means, you know, send us an email. We will read that email very carefully to check that it's not a phishing email. Don't put a link in there. We won't click on it. By all means, send us an email and we can reach out or give us a call. And we will definitely extend, there's two things there. I'm more than happy to have a 30-minute conversation with you on the phone about your cybersecurity and your business and how we could potentially help or give you some tips and that on what you need to do or what you need to go and look at. The other bit there is I said I would do that dark web scan for you if that's what you're after. Again, I just need your email address and I can actually run that and see if there are any compromised accounts for you. So we can provide that report for free. So just reach out to us and we can get that done for you.
Okay, so are there any questions? It doesn't look like there are.
No, and there's our email address and numbers and that. So please reach out or reach out on LinkedIn or via email. And like I said, we'll do our best to address any questions you have there. But otherwise, I think I'll leave it there. Thanks for everyone for attending, and we'll see you in the new year.
Have a safe and happy Christmas.
Thanks, everyone.